On March 2, this legislature passed Chapter 23 of the laws of 2020 to enhance the emergency powers of the governor. On March 2, 2020, I voted no. I voted against Chapter 23. I voted no, as I said on the floor that day, because I wanted decisions affecting the health of New Yorkers to be made by the state's health officials, not by an elected official. I would have preferred that we had some different kind of legislation to enhance the powers of the health commissioner, not the governor. But the legislature saw fit to pass Chapter 23. And today we visit, again, Chapter 23. We revisit that determination. Today is different than March 2, 2020. Today we know far more about COVID-19, but we still don't know everything we need to know. Today, numerous executive orders have been issued by the governor, some pursuant to Chapter 23, and some pursuant to other powers that he has inherently or under the statutes. Chapter 23 is about to expire at the end of April. This bill does three very important things. One, it repeals Chapter 23 immediately. Two, this bill continues existing executive orders. And three, this bill gives the legislature some new powers. I am pleased that this bill repeals Chapter 23. It's very clear in this bill that section is repealed. It expires immediately. I am pleased that this bill gives the legislature a new important power. You heard Mr. Zebrowski answer my question. The legislature may terminate a state disaster emergency declaration, not just the present one, but any one in the future. That is an extremely important enhancement of the power of the legislature, which we did not have before. And we can do it by concurrent resolution. We don't need the governor's consent. Some of my colleagues have expressed concerns about a governor dragging on some emergency declaration. This returns the power to the people in this House to overturn a governor's declaration if some governor decides to drag it on too long. With respect to the executive orders, Mr. Speaker, this bill does some very important things. One, it limits the governor's power to issue new and to reissue existing directives. Secondly, it reaffirms the local government's power. And thirdly, it establishes an organized process for involving the legislature in dealing with this pandemic. On this last point, let us remember that it's the governor who issues the declaration of disaster. And some of the things that we talk about doing, and which the governor has done through executive order, I believe are permissible only because of that declaration of emergency. I don't think without that declaration, this House would start to restrict the number of people who can congregate in one place or the hours of a business. You need that emergency declaration, so we need to have a partnership with the governor. And the bill that has been presented by Mr. Zebrowski today and is before us today cements that partnership. It brings us into the emergency situation. So we too have a basis for regulating conduct in an emergency situation. Further, we must recognize that many of the executive orders have had a significant impact on limiting the spread of COVID-19. If we are concerned about the health and safety of New Yorkers, we need to have a united statewide effort to coordinate the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We cannot have one county requiring masks and another not. We cannot have one county prioritizing vaccinations to medical personnel, another to seniors, another to teachers, another to elected officials, and another on a first-come, first-served basis. We have to have a uniform policy so the people of the state of New York know what New York is doing. Similarly, as I said before, we need health professionals leading the way. Now, I know there's been some criticism of our present health department, and I share that criticism. But we cannot have a legislative body debating the fine points of how many people should be in one space at the same time, or how many, or so many of the other matters covered by the various directives. But by allowing the continuation of the directives, this legislature will have an opportunity to systematically review the executive orders and pass legislation where legislation is appropriate and leave in place those executive orders that are appropriate. With a little bit of effort, we can replace those existing executive orders with better drafted legislation. And we should do so. And I urge my colleagues to look at these and to present legislation where they think it's appropriate. I, for example, have introduced several bills. There's one right now, which is on our agenda, which hopefully we'll get to on Monday, dealing with the election law. And I've introduced a comprehensive election law reform for the pandemic time only. And I've introduced a bill authorizing local governments to use virtual meetings, and a bill to extend from 21 to 23 the end date for kids in school with IEPs. So if we want to work together and we want to say that we're in charge, not the governor, then we all have to get together and look at these resolutions and put forward legislation that makes sense, that protects the people of the state of New York. But we need time to do so. Now, clearly there's a difference of opinion in this House, reflective of a difference of opinion throughout the state as to the need for some of these executive orders. Some of my colleagues today have objected to certain executive orders that the governor has issued. And I'm sure if we had a debate over these, many of us would be on the other side. The cause of the business closings, by the way, is not the governor. It's the pandemic. I share the concerns about the health of our businesses. I have a lot of businesses in my district as well. But in restoring the health of our businesses, I don't want to do so to the detriment of the health of our people. And that's a very fine balance that we must consider. Now, some other issues have been raised, and I'd like to address them. We've heard some answers. One, how did this bill come about? Well, I believe the Speaker that there was an agreement solely with the Majority Leader of the Senate and not with the governor. We could parse the words of the governor very clearly. He never really did say that he sat down and had a conference with the Speaker and the Majority Leader. What he said was, we have an agreement with the Senate. So if he's in agreement with our bill, I'm fine by that. If some people want to think that he's a liar, be my guest. All I know is I believe the Speaker that this bill was not negotiated with the governor. And I was sitting there through all of the Democratic conferences where Mr. Zabrowski was leading the discussion, where we went on for days. We went on for days. The Democratic conference, there were people in the conference who wanted to just revoke the powers immediately. But then we started to realize that that had implications beyond just the image of taking charge. And I looked at this bill carefully, and I'm very pleased to see that some of the language that I suggested in conference is very similar to some of the language that's in this bill. And I see other things in there, other suggestions by my colleagues. And I know that Mr. Zabrowski wrote this bill, the first draft. So this bill came from the Democratic majority members, not from the governor's office. And we did, as Mr. Zabrowski said before, have quite a bit of discussion about this for days. But we were very concerned about being sure that in revoking the governor's powers, we did no harm, that we didn't hurt the people of the state of New York. And we hope that this bill will do that, and I believe it's a good step forward. The second issue that's been raised is about the governor. This bill is not about this governor. It's not about this governor's powers. It's about the executive branch's powers, no matter who the governor is, about how best to keep the people of the state of New York safe. And I think this bill is a good balance. Thirdly, the question has been asked, what do you say to those who complain about restrictions that are keeping them from fully opening their businesses from congregating in large numbers, from doing what they used to do. What I say is New York is trying to keep you safe and keep your family safe. And when the spread of the pandemic subsides, we will return to normal. And if the then governor does not lift the disaster declaration, this legislature will do so, a power we did not have before. So as I end, I want to reiterate 2 points. First, the emergency declaration is the governor's to issue. It automatically gives him some powers with or without Chapter 23. There are some things that we can't do, or at least we shouldn't do, without a declaration by the governor. And secondly, under this legislation, the legislature gains power to terminate an emergency declaration of disaster if we believe that it was wrongfully issued or is going on too long. This is not a perfect piece of legislation, but it's a good piece of legislation. While I voted against Chapter 23, I now will vote for this legislation. I will vote yes and urge my colleagues to do so.